Farmer cut down an old tree but then noticed something strange inside. Thomas had lived in the village all his life. He was an old man now, with a slow walk and hands rough from years of work. His farm sat at the edge of the village, surrounded by quiet hills and open fields. The land had been in his family for generations. His grandfather had worked this soil, so had his father. Now it was Thomas's turn, though his steps were not as strong as they once were. He woke up early every day. He fed the chickens, checked the fences, and watched over the crops. He didn't have much, but he took care of what he had. The village knew him as a quiet man. He kept to himself but always helped when asked. His life was simple and slow, filled with the same tasks year after year. At the center of his field stood an old tree. It was large, with a thick trunk and wide branches. It had been there for longer than anyone could remember. The bark was cracked and dark. Some of the branches had broken off during storms. Leaves no longer grew on one side. The tree looked tired, like it had seen too many seasons. Thomas had always known the tree. He had played under it as a child. He had sat beneath its shade during hot summers. His father had once tied a swing to one of its strong branches. That branch had fallen long ago. Still, the tree stood even as time passed around it. People in the village talked about the tree. Some said it had once been part of an old path travelers used long ago. Others believed it marked the edge of ancient land. Children made up stories about it, calling it the Watcher Tree, because it seemed to stand guard over the field. But to Thomas, it was just the old tree that had always been there. Now the tree was dying. Its roots had started to lift from the earth. The bark peeled away in long strips. When the wind blew, the whole tree creaked like an old door. Thomas knew it could fall at any time. It had become a danger. He had put off cutting it for years, but he could no longer wait. If it fell on its own, it might damage the barn or the fence. Could even hurt someone. The choice was not easy. He had memories tied to that tree. It had been there through all the moments of his life, both quiet and important. Still, he knew what had to be done. One morning, after feeding the animals, Thomas went to the shed and took out his axe. He stood at the edge of the field for a long time, looking at the tree. The wind moved through its dry branches. He took a deep breath and walked toward it. He touched the bark with his hand. Felt rough like stone. Then he stepped back and raised the axe. The first swing was strong. A loud crack echoed across the field. The sound felt strange, like breaking something sacred. Still, he continued. Each swing cut deeper into the trunk. Wood chips flew. The axe made steady dents, one after another. The air smelled like dry bark and old earth. Birds flew from the branches. A squirrel ran down the side and disappeared into the grass. The tree groaned as the cut grew wider. Thomas wiped sweat from his face and kept going. His arms ached, but he didn't stop. The job had to be done. After many strikes, the tree leaned. It let out a long, low sound as it began to fall. Thomas stepped back and watched. The trunk came down with a heavy thud, shaking the ground. Dust rose into the air. Small branches snapped and scattered. The old tree lay still. Thomas stood there for a moment. The field looked strange without the tree standing tall. Part of the land seemed empty now. He walked toward the fallen trunk. His boots crushed dry leaves and twigs. The job was not yet finished. He still had to cut the trunk and clear the wood. But as he stepped closer to the cut section, he noticed something different. The inside looked strange. It was darker than he expected. He moved closer. There was a hollow space near the center of the trunk. It was not just a crack. It was a deep, empty place hidden inside the tree. The opening was wide enough to fit both of his hands. Thomas bent down and looked inside. At first, he saw dust and cobwebs. Then something else caught the light. It was a dull glimmer, half covered by wood dust. He leaned in, squinting. It looked like metal. He felt a sudden chill, though the day was warm. His heart beat a little faster. He reached into the hollow, brushing aside pieces of bark and dirt. His fingers touched something cold. He pulled it out slowly. It was a small metal box. The sides were rusty and rough. It had hinges, a latch, and a tiny lock. The The surface was covered in spots and dents, but the shape was still clear. It had been hidden for a very long time. Thomas stood up and held the box in both hands. His fingers shook slightly. He didn't expect this. He looked around, as if someone else might be watching. But the field was quiet. Only the wind moved the grass. He walked to a nearby tree stump and placed the box on top. He stared at it for a while. His mind raced. Who had hidden it? Why was it inside the tree? How long had it been there? He reached down and touched the lock. It was old and fragile. The metal flaked under his thumb. He didn't want to break it, but it seemed ready to fall apart. He picked up a small rock and tapped the latch. The rust gave way, and the lock snapped open. The lid creaked as he lifted it. A faint smell came out. Old paper, dry leather, and dust. Inside the box was a bundle of folded papers tied with a faded ribbon. The corners were soft and bent. The paper looked yellow and thin. Next to the papers was a small leather pouch. It was dark brown, cracked from age, and tied with a thin string. The pouch looked fragile, like it would fall apart if handled too roughly. Thomas didn't touch anything right away. He just stared. He felt a strange mix of fear and wonder. His hands rested on the edge of the open box. The light from the sun made the boxes inside glow faintly. For a long moment he said nothing, moved nothing. He just stood there looking down. Then he noticed something else. The box had lines carved into the lid. They were shallow and faded but still visible. Simple lines. Maybe just scratches. Maybe something more. He traced them with his finger. The grooves felt smooth, worn down by time. He took a step back. His face had lost color. His lips were tight. The world around him felt quieter now. The tree that once stood strong had been hiding something. Something old. Something lost. Something not meant to be forgotten. He did not understand yet what it all meant. But he knew it was important. The box had waited inside that tree for years. Maybe decades. Maybe longer. Someone had put it there on purpose. Someone had meant for it to be found. Thomas gently closed the lid. The box made a soft click as it shut. He picked it up again and held it close to his chest. His thoughts were heavy. He turned and began walking back to his house, holding the box carefully with both hands. He had not planned for any of this. He had only wanted to remove an old tree. Now something else had started. Something he did not expect. Thomas placed the metal box on his wooden table. The light from the window fell on it, showing its rough surface and rusted corners. It looked even older now that it was inside the house. The lock was broken, and the lid sat slightly open. He slowly lifted it again. The bundle of papers lay neatly in the box. The ribbon around them was thin and almost gray. It looked like it had once been red or pink, but the color had faded. The edges of the papers were soft and curled. The surface of each page was yellow and spotted. Some corners had tiny tears. They looked fragile, like they could tear just by breathing on them. Thomas picked up the bundle carefully. The papers felt dry, almost brittle. He placed them on the table and untied the ribbon. Came loose with almost no resistance. He spread out the first paper. The ink was faded but still readable. The handwriting was small, neat, and slanted. The letters were written with care. As he moved through each page, he noticed that some had stains. Maybe from water, maybe from tears, or maybe just time. Some words had faded more than others. But most of the writing remained. Each page looked like it had been folded many times. The creases ran across the paper like thin scars. Beside the letters sat the small leather pouch. It was dark brown and cracked across the surface. The string that tied it shut was dry and frayed. Thomas picked it up slowly and untied the string. The pouch gave off a faint smell, like old leather and earth. He turned the pouch over and opened it wide. Several coins spilled out onto the table. They rolled gently before coming to a stop. They were round and gold in color. Some had dark spots from age. Others still shone, catching the sunlight in a soft glow. Thomas leaned in to look closer. The coins were not like modern ones. Each had strange symbols on one side. The designs looked like they were from another time. Some had what looked like suns, moons, or stars. Others had shapes that looked like animals or plants. There were no numbers and no names he recognized. The coins felt thick and solid. He picked one up and turned it over. On the back, there were more marks, maybe letters, maybe signs from a language he didn't know. The edges were rough, as if they had been made by hand. Each coin looked slightly different from the others. There were about a dozen of them. Some were smaller, some larger. But they all had the same golden tone. Thomas lined them up on the table. Even covered in dust and worn by time, they looked valuable. But it was not just the gold that mattered. It was the feeling they gave. They seemed important, like they were part of something bigger. Thomas looked back at the letters. The pages and coins had been stored together for a reason. Someone had put them in that box and hidden them. Not to be spent, not to be used, but to be kept safe. Maybe they were part of a plan. Maybe they were part of a memory. He picked up the next letter. The paper made a soft sound as he unfolded it. More handwriting filled the page. He read each word slowly. He could feel the care behind them. The writer had chosen every sentence with purpose. The letters spoke of hope, fear, and waiting. The words felt real, even though they were written long ago. Each page added something new. The letters told of dreams and decisions. They spoke of places, names, and plans. There was worry in some of them, joy in others. They were not just notes. They were pieces of someone's heart. Thomas kept reading. The house was quiet. The coins stayed still on the table, catching light as the sun moved across the sky. The letters seemed to come alive with each word. The ink may have faded, but the feelings had not. He placed the last letter on the table and sat back. His eyes stayed on the open pages. The coins beside them glowed faintly in the light. Both the papers and the coins had been waiting. They had been sealed away in silence. Now they were out. Now they had a voice again. The letters were written by two people, Samuel and Eleanor. Samuel was a blacksmith. His hands were strong from work, and he was known for shaping tools and horseshoes. He lived near the edge of the village, in a small house made of stone and wood. He did not have much, but he worked hard every day. He cared deeply for Eleanor. Eleanor was different. Her life was not shaped by hard work or long days in the sun. She was the daughter of a wealthy merchant. Her family owned land and sold goods in the nearby towns. Her clothes were fine, and her life was comfortable. But there was something missing. She felt trapped in a world that did not belong to her. The letters showed how they met. At first, it was only by chance, passing each other in the village square or at the edge of the market. But slowly, something grew between them. It was not rushed. It was quiet and careful. They wrote to each other in secret. They shared dreams and worries. They found comfort in each other's words. Samuel spoke of leaving the village one day. He wanted to build a new life where no one cared about class or family names. He saved what little he could. The coins in the pouch, the ones Thomas had found, were part of those savings. Each coin was a piece of Samuel's hope. He believed that one day he and Eleanor would start fresh, far from the people who kept them apart. Eleanor wanted the same. She was tired of being told what to do. Her parents had plans for her future, and they did not include Samuel. But in her letters, she wrote about the moments they shared under the old tree. She remembered the way the light came through the leaves. The tree had become their secret place. It was where they met when no one else could see. It was where they dreamed about running away together. The story in the letters unfolded slowly. Each one showed a part of their growing love. Eleanor shared how she had hidden her letters in her sewing box. Samuel wrote about counting the days until they could leave. They knew the risk. They knew their love was not accepted. But still, they hoped. The writing showed their fear, too. Samuel worried he would never be enough. Eleanor feared her father's anger. But through all the fear, they kept writing. They believed that love could be stronger than anything else. They planned to meet under the tree one last time. From there, they would leave the village for good. As Thomas read, he could picture them clearly. He imagined Samuel walking down a narrow path, looking over his shoulder, carrying the small pouch. He imagined Eleanor slipping away from her house, her heart beating fast. He saw them sitting under the tree, holding hands, whispering dreams into the wind. The old tree had watched it all. Its wide branches had stretched above them as they made promises they were never sure they could keep. The tree had held their hopes in its silence. It had become more than a hiding place. It had become a witness to their love. Each letter added more detail. Sometimes the tone was light, filled with hope. Other times it was heavy, full of fear and doubt. But the love never faded. It stayed strong in every word. They both believed in something better. Thomas sat in silence for a long time after reading. He did not speak. He did not move. He just let the story settle in his chest. He could feel the weight of what they had been through. It was more than just a romance. It was a fight against the rules of their world. The papers were old. The ink was faint, but the love inside them still felt strong. Samuel and Eleanor had lived, had dreamed, and had dared to hope for a life they could not reach. Their story had been hidden, but now it was no longer forgotten. The final letter was not like the others. It felt heavier in Thomas's hands. The paper was more worn, the ink more faded. Even before reading, he could sense that something had changed. The earlier letters had been filled with hope, love, and dreams. But this one felt different. The words inside carried a weight the others did not. As he began to read, the tone was clear. Something had gone wrong. The letter did not begin with joy. It began with fear. It spoke of trouble, of danger, of a plan that could no longer be trusted. The writing was rushed in places. The lines were uneven, and the letters looked shakier than before. The message came from someone under pressure. The letter said they were supposed to meet under the tree. That meeting had been the final step in their plan. From there, they would leave the village and start a new life. But that meeting never happened. The writer was filled with doubt. There were questions and there were regrets. Words like sorry, too late, and forgive stood out. It was clear that something had stopped them. Thomas felt a deep sadness as he read. The letter showed no clear reason for the failure. There was no mention of a storm or illness. It was not nature that had stopped them. It was people. The letter hinted at a secret decision made by Eleanor's family. It spoke of guards, locked doors, and people watching. It seemed that she had been caught trying to leave. Her family may have found one of the earlier letters or noticed her packing things. Whatever it was, they had acted quickly. They had stopped her before she could reach the tree. Samuel had waited, but she never came. He may have stayed there for hours, looking down the path, hoping to see her face. But the letter said nothing more about what he saw or felt that day. Only that he left something behind. Only that he had no choice. There was more. The letter hinted at another painful twist. It said that Eleanor's father had arranged for her to marry someone else. A rich man from another town. Someone with land, money, and power. Someone her father believed was more worthy. The wedding was to happen quickly, before she could run again. She had been told she had no say. The letter ended with a goodbye. The words were soft, broken, and full of sorrow. The lines were short, as if the writer could not keep going. The final sentence was simple. It said the love would never die, even if they could not be together. Thomas placed the letter on the table. His chest felt heavy. The silence in the room was thick. The sun had moved across the sky, and the light now hit the coins on the table, making them glow again. The coins had never been used. They had never bought a train ticket or a meal. They had only waited, locked in that box, hidden in the heart of the old tree. The dream had ended before it could begin. Their plan to escape had fallen apart. The story that had started with such hope had ended in silence. The tree had stood for years as a reminder, though no one had known. And now, Thomas knew what the tree had been guarding all along. The heartbreak was real. It had been written with trembling hands and a tired heart. The couple's love had been strong, but it had not been enough to beat the forces around them. Family pressure, fear, and control had been stronger. The final letter carried no anger. It did not blame. It only mourned. It was filled with the kind of pain that comes from something lost forever. The kind of pain that never fully fades. Thomas stayed at the table for a long time. He did not speak. He did not move. He just sat with the story, letting it settle in his mind. The old tree had fallen, but it had given up its secret. Now the truth had been read, and the silence had been broken. Thomas could not let the story end with the last letter. He felt a strong need to know more. The words in the letters had left him with questions. He wanted to understand what had really happened to Samuel and Eleanor. He wanted to know if anyone else in the village remembered them. He believed their story should not stay hidden. There was one person in the village who might help. She was the village historian. She lived near the town square and kept many records in her home. She collected old maps, letters, journals, and photographs. People often gave her things when they cleaned out their attics or found something from the past. Thomas brought the letters and the pouch to her. He did not say much. He simply handed over the items and waited. She took them with care and promised to look into it. She knew how to search the past. She had books full of names, dates, and family trees. If anyone could help, it was her. She spent many days reading the letters. She compared the handwriting, checked the ink, and studied the type of paper. Then she began to search her records. She looked through birth records, death lists, and wedding notices. She flipped through journals from old families. She searched every corner of her collection for any sign of Samuel or Eleanor. After some time, she found something. There was a record of a blacksmith named Samuel who had lived in the village over 100 years ago. His name appeared in the local trade lists. He had been a skilled worker. He had fixed tools and made iron gates. But one day his name stopped showing up. No one wrote about him again after that year. She also found the name Eleanor in a family journal. It was a thick book passed down through generations. The book belonged to a rich family that once lived near the river. It listed the names of children, marriages, and events. Eleanor's name was there. It said she had been promised to a man from another town. There was no mention of Samuel. There was no mention of love or letters. Only a quiet note that said she had moved away after her marriage. Thomas listened to everything. The names matched. The dates lined up. The small details in the letters made sense when compared to the records. The story in the letters was real. Samuel and Eleanor had lived in the village. Their love had been true. Their plan had been stopped. The truth had been hidden for many years. Word of the discovery began to spread. The historian shared what she had found with a few other villagers. They were surprised by the story. Some said they had heard bits and pieces long ago. Others said their grandparents had once spoken of a forbidden love, but they never knew the names. People were moved by the story. They wanted to know more. They wanted to remember. Thomas was quiet through it all. He still carried the weight of what he had found. He visited the historian often. They talked about the past, about the records, and about how stories fade over time. Thomas felt a deep respect for the people who had come before. He believed their story deserved to be known. The historian continued her work. She found an old drawing of the village from long ago. It showed the blacksmith's house and the merchant's home. It even showed a tree standing alone in a field, near the edge of the village. That was the same tree Thomas had cut down. The same one that had held the box. The drawing gave more proof to the story. It placed Samuel and Eleanor exactly where the letters said they had been. The village began to care about the story. It was no longer just Thomas's discovery. It became a piece of the village's history. The letters, the coins, and the drawing all came together. The past had come to life and people were listening. Thomas felt both sorrow and peace. He had started with a simple task, cutting down an old tree. But what he found had led to something much greater. The truth had been buried, but now it was rising again. Step by step, the story was being rebuilt. The discovery had changed something in Thomas. He no longer saw the land around him the same way. The field where the old tree once stood now felt different. It was no longer just part of his daily work. It had become something more. The fallen tree was not just a piece of wood. It had held a story that had waited to be heard. Thomas started to visit the tree stump each morning. He would stand there for a few minutes before starting his work. The stump was wide and flat, the surface rough and dry. Bits of bark still clung to the sides. Grass had started to grow around it again. It looked quiet, But Thomas knew it had once hidden something full of life. He had always worked the land with care, but now he moved slower. He noticed more. He paid closer attention to the sounds of the wind and the feel of the soil. The letters had given him a deep connection to the past. They made him think about all the things that get buried and forgotten over time. The people in the village also changed. After hearing the full story, they saw the old tree differently too. It was no longer just a part of Thomas's field. It had been the keeper of a love story. It had stood through seasons of rain, snow, and sun while holding on to something important. Many people began to visit Thomas's land, not to see crops or animals, but to see the place where the box had been found. Some villagers brought flowers and placed them near the stump. Others brought small stones and arranged them in circles. A few carved shapes into pieces of wood and left them behind as signs of respect. No one needed to speak. Their actions said enough. Thomas did not ask for any of this. He had not planned for it, but he welcomed it. He began to think about how to protect the memory of Samuel and Eleanor. He spoke with the historian and a few others. They agreed to create a small sign that told the story. Nothing fancy, just a wooden board with simple words, placed near the stump. The sign told of a blacksmith and a merchant's daughter. It told of letters, coins, and a meeting that never happened. It explained how the tree had guarded their memory until the day Thomas cut it down. The village helped place the sign. Some stood in silence while it was raised. Others stayed to share what the story meant to them. Thomas kept the letters and coins safe. He made a special box to store them, one that would protect them from time and weather. He placed it in his home, near a window that let in the morning light. Sometimes he would open it and read a letter or look at the coins. He no longer felt alone when he did. He felt surrounded by something greater than himself. Children in the village began to hear the story from their parents. They would walk past the sign and point. They would ask questions. Their eyes lit up with wonder. Some would sit by the stump and draw pictures. Others would sit in silence, as if listening for voices in the wind. The tree, once seen as old and weak, had become something special. It was no longer just a fallen piece of nature. It was a reminder. It had given the village a reason to remember, to feel, and to care. It had turned into a symbol of love, of loss, and of holding on. Thomas felt lighter. He still woke early and did his chores, but something inside him had shifted. He had found something he didn't know he was missing. Not gold, not treasure, but a connection to those who had come before. He had become part of their story. Seasons passed. The stump grew moss. The wooden sign aged. But people still came. They still cared. The story had taken root just like the old tree once had. And now it would not be forgotten. If you want more stories like this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for all your support.